Well, good morning and welcome to this Sunday Forum. We are going to explore the history behind the lay organization of St. Matthew's. And we have with us our two-star archivists, Alan Cronenberg and Elaine Druesdedow, who have prepared this for us. I can't tell you how much the Archives Committee has labored so heavily over the past 2 years to create what we call the bicentennial book with Alan's text and Elaine's management of hundreds, if not thousands, of photos. This is an announcement. You can go on the website to pre-order your copy of the bicentennial book, and many of you have already done so. It will be here in time for the parish bicentennial on the 22nd. Also an announcement, the bake sale is happening over to the right. And if you, at any point in the talk, should you get peckish, you're allowed to get up quietly and go and buy more baked goods to support the youth program. You all have found a green card on your seat. And if you're at home and joining by Zoom, you can do this with your own piece of pencil and paper. Before we begin the presentation, I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and then I'll hand it over to Alan. For the questions, I would like you to write on one side of the green card, and I have pencils, should they be needed. What do you care for most here at St. Matthew's? What do you care for most about this parish? What do you care for most at St. Matthew's?
Robert, we have one now.
So if there's one thing that you would love to see still around in 200 years about the current St. Matthew's, like what do you care for most in the parish? And then on the other side of the card, I'm going to ask you, what do you have to offer the parish? Perhaps it is prayers, perhaps it is witness to the gospel, perhaps it is teaching, perhaps it is your life of study, perhaps it is pastoral care, perhaps it is your organization of ministries and mission. On the flip side of the card is, what do you have to offer the parish? What do you have to give to the ministry of this community? It's a little pre-reflection before we begin the presentation. Because, spoiler alert, the presentation is about the lay people organizing St. Matthew's, and the meaning of this is about lay ministry at St. Matthew's. So with that, I'd like to, we'll come back to those cards later, but I would like to turn it over to Alan, who will begin with talking about gathering up of broken strands, the renewal of St. Matthew's in 1824.
Okay, can you hear me okay? I don't need, okay, good, thanks. Next Sunday, St. Matthew's will be celebrating its refounding 200 years ago in 1824. On August the 23rd, 1824, 31 residents of Hillsborough and Orange County signed this document, which you can read up there. We whose names are subscribed do hereby form ourselves into a congregation to be known by the name of St. Matthew's Church, and do also hereby promise conformity to the Constitution and canons of the Protestant Episcopal Church as established by the General Convention of the same. Now, most of the people who signed that document, probably all of them, were members of prominent families in this community. Some had very long ties, most had very long ties with the Anglican tradition. Some of you might remember Ed Southern, who was a member of the parish and was clerk of the vestry for many years. And Ed attempted to draw a diagram showing the relationships among all of the families. And how about if you'll give us that to show a diagram showing this was a futile effort, as you can imagine. These are these are the connections between the 5, 6, 7, 8 families that were prominent in the community and whose members, many of whom signed this document. And there's go to the next, there's a Ed Southern light diagram, which shows the connections between the Camerons and the Webbs and the Ruffins and so forth. Well, 100 years ago, in 1924, Bishop Joseph Blunt Cheshire Jr., by the way, he was not only bishop, but he was a very good historian. And more than that, he was married to Annie Husk Webb, who was a member of the Webb family, which was very prominent at St. Matthew's. So he knew this church very well for a variety through historical research as well as family traditions. Well, Cheshire delivered a history sermon on the centennial anniversary of the refounding of St. Matthew's Church in 1924. And in that sermon, he contended that the founders of St. Matthew's in 1824 were not, quote, a new corporation, but the perpetuation of the life of the past. It is, as I have before stated, the gathering up of broken strands and renewing continuity with the past, the perpetuation of the old under new forms, end quote. In other words, St. Matthew's was the product of an abiding Anglican faith that had been nurtured from one generation to the next for the past 100 or so years. It's not something new springing up, but it was a culmination of efforts of several families that had continued to worship in the Anglican and now Episcopal faith, and had come together to form St. Matthew's. So today we're going to take a look at some of those strands that Bishop Cheshire talked about. Let's just imagine, let's go back to the colonial era, back to the 18th century, and to the Piedmont, this area of North Carolina. It was very thinly populated. There were only a few rough roads in this area. Most of those roads had been trails used by indigenous people to travel and to trade. There were a handful of small villages in the Piedmont. There was not any government to speak of. And it's not until the 1740s and the 1750s that settlers began arriving in increasing numbers. And some of these settlers came from the eastern part of the colony, which was much more heavily populated, places like Edenton and New Bern and Bath. Some came from Virginia and Pennsylvania. Others came up from South Carolina, from the Charleston area. But there was no government, thinly populated, and the British government wanted to establish a stronger presence in the Piedmont. And in order to strengthen royal authority in the Piedmont, the colonial government created St. Matthew's Parish and Orange County. That was in 1752. But it's not until 15 years later, in 1767, that Governor Tryon sent the Reverend George Meiklejohn to build a church in this village and to nurture an Anglican congregation. Meiklejohn got to work advertising advertising this job of building a church, and contractors were found, labor was found, probably much of it from slave labor. But in 1767, in the midst of the Regulator Rebellion, a magnificent building was constructed to serve both as a place of worship, as well as to serve secular functions. And that the building, which was built on lot 98, which is on lot 98, was at the intersection of what is now Tryon and Churton Streets. It's where the Orange County Museum and the Presbyterian Church now stand. It was a magnificent building. It was much bigger than the current St. Matthew's. It could hold 200 people. In fact, during the Revolution, several meetings were held in that building, and at least 180 or so delegates attended. So it was a large, very handsome structure. Many people who passed through town commented on how beautiful it was. Lot 98, where the Presbyterian Church now stands, used to belong to St. Matthew's. In later years, in 1824, when this St. Matthew's was finally built, many parishioners wanted to reclaim that site. A new building had been built there. And in 1816, the Presbyterians called the Reverend John Witherspoon to become their register, and they laid claim to that building. And the parishioners here in 1824 thought they ought to have that building, that the Presbyterians were a bunch of squatters, and that we ought to have it. But Judge Ruffin, it was apparently Judge Ruffin who said, wait a minute, hold on, let's not rush to this. That's going to be a legal tangle, and it's going to unnecessarily ruffle a lot of feathers. And instead, I will give you a site up on the hill on which we can build an Episcopal church. So that's how we got to be here, and the Presbyterians continue to this day. Although in 1776, the government of North Carolina passed legislation saying that whichever church owned property before the Revolution, the property still belonged to that church. So legally, the Episcopalians were entitled to it, but we decided to back off and not to fight the Presbyterians. And in fact,
It's not too late.
not too late. I think in the meantime, a number of Presbyterians have probably joined us, and we have to welcome them. In any event, when the revolution broke out in 1776, the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Church, was just completely wrecked. It was disestablished, which meant that it lost its guaranteed stream of income. And even as important, the problem of apostolic succession was up in the air. The Bishop of Canterbury in England refused to consecrate any bishops elected in the American colonies that were revolting against Great Britain. And so how was this problem to be solved? Well, in 1784, a bishop went to Scotland. Samuel Seabury had been elected bishop by his diocese. He went to Scotland and was consecrated in Scotland as a bishop of the Scottish Episcopal Church. And there he came back, and then it was possible to consecrate other American bishops. 5 years later, in 1789, 9 bishops and clergy from dioceses in the United States met in Philadelphia and formed the Protestant Episcopal Church of the United States. And the Protestant Episcopal Church invited other dioceses or other former colonies to create dioceses and elect bishops and send them to the General Convention to be consecrated. And in the early 1790s, there were 4 conventions. There were just a handful of Episcopal priests in North Carolina, but those handful, including George Meiklejohn, who had been the rector here back in the 1770s, they met in Tarboro 4 times and tried to form a diocese, but those efforts never got anywhere. Although the last one, in 1794, did elect a bishop. Charles Pettigrew from Edenton was elected bishop of what was to become the Diocese of North Carolina. But Pettigrew never made it to Philadelphia to the next General Convention. First time he turned around because of probably typhoid fever in Norfolk. Anyway, he heard on the way that it was something like typhoid fever, malaria, and he turned around, came back to Edenton, and he didn't go to the next convention for reasons that are just entirely unknown. So we didn't have a bishop and we didn't have a diocese until 1817, when a diocese was formed, mainly through the efforts of Adam Impey. Adam Impey was erected in Wilmington. Bethel Judd was in Fayetteville. And those were the 2 Episcopal rectors who were the most diligent in advocating for the formation of a diocese in 1817. And it finally came into being in 1817. There was no bishop elected from North Carolina. Instead, the Right Reverend Richard Channing Moore of Virginia served as a part-time bishop. He was Bishop of Virginia and also part-time bishop in North Carolina. He's been called the borrowed bishop. Yeah, it's interesting that Adam Impey wasn't elected bishop. Some people have suggested that it would have been very logical. I mean, he'd been the spark plug behind the creation of the diocese here. But in any event, it's not until 1823 that a Virginian, John Ravenscroft, would be elected by the North Carolina diocese and would become the first North Carolina bishop. And his influence on the church was just monumental. He was high church, and his imprint on the diocese and the Episcopal tradition was long lasting and just very, very important. But what was going on in Hillsborough at that time? Religion was not dormant in Hillsborough and Orange County in those years. And we know from both our parish register and diocesan journal, convention journals, as well as some correspondence. We know that there was a lot of, quite a bit of activity by Episcopal rectors and missionaries in Orange County in the years, in the late 18 teens and early 1820s. In fact, I was gonna. Our parish register, do we have a picture? Yeah, yeah. The parish register has a page. These are historical notes by Reverend Joseph Murphy, who was rector of St. Matthew's in the 1880s. And Murphy was a good historian, and he among other things, he went out to the Latta family and took a look at their Bible, and he figured out and wrote down all the members of the Latta family, for example, who had been baptized and married by Episcopal priests or missionaries. Anyway, let me just go through a few of the rectors and missionaries who came through Orange County and who performed baptisms and weddings. The Reverend Gregory Bedell, or Bedell, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, rector of St. John's in Fayetteville, preached at St. Mary's Chapel, at St. Jude's, and in Hillsborough's Presbyterian Church, where he baptized 9 children and married 1 couple. Impey and the Reverend Robert Davis, who was a missionary and also a cousin of the Latta family, preached and performed baptisms. The Reverend John Phillips, rector in Tarboro, reported visits to Hillsborough and to Duncan Cameron's plantation. The Reverend William Huppard Sr. and the Reverend Thomas Wright performed missionary duties in Orange County. The Diocesan Journal of 1822 reported that the Reverend William Mercer Green, who was deacon and missionary at Williamsboro and would soon become the first rector at St. Matthew's. That's a picture of Green many years later, by the way. He was a young man when he came here, but this is when he was chancellor of the University of the South in the 50s, 60s. He was one of the founders of Sewanee. But anyway, Green baptized 4 persons in Orange County. He later baptized 2 in Hillsborough, 10 at Milton, which is up near the Virginia border, 4 at St. Mary's Chapel. The Reverend John Stark Ravenscroft, who was had been elected bishop in 1823, baptized the son of Phoebe and Walker Anderson, who was the nephew and ward of Duncan Cameron. A Methodist minister baptized the daughter of Emily and Francis Hawkes. Both Anderson and Hawkes would later play very prominent roles in at St. Matthew's. Anyway, get that is, I mean, there was still a lot of, there was no diocese, there was no bishop to support, or at least until 1817, there was no diocese and no elected full-time bishop until 1823 to really support religious activity and worship, baptisms and marriages in Orange County. Well, how this group of 31 individuals, 31 laymen, how they came together to subscribe to this document organizing St. Matthew's, we don't know. We do know that Adam Impey was very keen on organizing a church in Hillsborough. Later on, Bishop Ravenscroft supported this. There's one letter from Adam Impey to Judge Ruffin, urging Ruffin to become active in forming a church. And it was probably Ruffin and Duncan Cameron who had the most impact on organizing this group. But, you know, it could have been one of, by the way, there were 15 women of the 31 who signed this charter. And people, you know, for years until the 1960s, it's the men who play a leading role on vestries and who dominate the church. Some of those men served on the vestry for 30 years, 50 years. It's, you know, but the women played other important roles, including being among the almost 50% of the people, and these women were very powerful women. Elaine's going to talk about some of them. But Elizabeth Estes, Eliza Estes, Miss Cameron, there were Ruffins, there were Webbs, and Andersons, and so forth. And so it's possible that maybe one of those women had played a prominent role. But in any event, on August the 23rd, 1824, 200 years ago, 31 people signed a declaration subscribing to hereby form ourselves into a congregation to be known by the name of St. Matthew's Church. So with that, I will end, and Elaine's going to talk about some of the prominent people who signed this document and played a key role in organizing and launching St. Matthew's.
Okay, we have the next slide. Just shows a transcribed list of these people. And we were pretty much able to determine their full forms of names and their dates. And in the next slide, Robert, we have a kind of clustering of the family groups that were involved, and you can see the Cameron Anderson Hawks group and the Ashen Grove group, the many Lattas and Ruffins, the Norwoods. So they were, as we've seen, had many familial ties. But I just wanted to start with the next person, Eliza Estes. She was an older woman at the time, age 65 in 1824. And it's interesting to consider, and we might wonder if perhaps that she might have played a leading role. She was the first person to sign the good organization, and also the first person to be noted as a communicant in 1824. So it's just kind of tantalizing to wonder if she had played a prominent role in that community. She married John Estes during the American Revolution, and they later bought lot 36, which is the way they talk about everything around here in Hillsborough, according to lots. And that was at the corner of Churton and Tryon, diagonally across from the old Anglican church, now the Presbyterian site. There were 2 dwellings on the lot. They lived in the smaller one and rented out the larger one to the many people that would attend legislative conventions and congresses at the nearby Anglican church. She had 1 child who didn't live but a year, and then her husband died in 1799 when she was just 40 years old. She never remarried, but within a year after her husband's death, she used that larger building to have a boarding house for the female students that were attending the Hillsborough Female Seminary. And you'll remember that that was overseen by our first rector, William Mercer Green. And interestingly enough, she was involved in lots of real estate, buying and selling lots both in town and outside town with certain farm properties. And she, according to the 1830 census, had 37 enslaved workers working on her out-of-town properties. She bequeathed her property to her nieces. One was her namesake, Eliza S.V. Evans Turner, who was the wife of another one of our signers, Josiah Turner Sr. He started out as a blacksmith and tinsmith and later partnered with others making wagons and then stills and owning a copper shop. He served as the county sheriff for 8 years and had a mercantile business as well. But during all of this business, he amassed a lot of farmland, and that also was worked by enslaved laborers. This ad for bacon, 5,000 pounds of it, might be an indication that hog farming was featured on these. That's pretty amazing. He was at the time the 2nd largest landowner in Orange County, although he, like many others, lost most of his wealth at the time after the Civil War. But today, also marking the certificate of organization, another thing that's important to note is the formation of our first vestry, and this is found in our parish register. This included 5 members from among the 31 signers. And the next slide shows a transcription from this page 2 of our register, recording this statement of important lay leadership certified by William Mercer Green. And I think it's important to remember at this time that we have been relying on the committed lay leadership of our vestry for over now 200 years. The first senior warden was Francis Lister Hawks, grandson of the architect of Tryon Palace in New Bern. And he was really devoted to St. Matthew's, and whenever the rector was not present, he would read sermons. He had a very promising legal career, but he set that aside to study for the ministry under William Mercer Green. He had then a distinguished career as a priest and a professor at the General Theological Seminary. He's a noted orator and an historiographer for the Episcopal Church of the United States. So he's widely known and highly admired. He married Emily Kirby, another signer, and his sister Phoebe Rice Hawks, also a signer, married Walker Anderson, a member of the first vestry, and he served on that vestry. He was the son of another signer, Mary Reed Cameron Anderson, sister of Duncan Cameron. And Walker Anderson and his wife Phoebe established a girls' boarding school in their home. They had 17 girls that lived there in the house with them. They named it Lochiel after the sea loch in Scotland. That was the home era of the home area of the Clan Cameron. He pursued a law degree, taught at UNC, and then later moved to Florida, where he held several public offices and became also a justice of the Florida State Supreme Court. So Walker Anderson's brother, William Anderson, another of our signers, but not a member of the vestry, was a teacher at the same boarding school, and he was also a merchant and banker. He married Frances Berglund, a daughter of another prominent family here at St. Matthew's. And although the most senior member of the vestry at the age of 57 in 1824, the others were about 23 to 37 years old. The most senior member was William Norwood, Judge Norwood, but he was elected St. Matthew's first junior warden. He was an attorney, a superior court judge, and a planter, and he was married to Rowena Hogg, the daughter of the famous Hogg, early mercantile person here in Hillsborough. Norwood served as a trustee and a supporter of the Hillsborough Academy, and he had many other civic engagements, although he was described as being a rather quiet and private man and not one to seek public office. And the small red brick building on Court Street was thought to have first belonged to Judge Norwood. And then we have Thomas Ruffin, and we all know about Thomas Ruffin and what he did to offer the property for the church, and certainly was a great benefactor. But, as we have struggled as a congregation to assess his legacy, we still want to, of course, keep in mind that I think that we hope that God has blessed Ruffin's good gift for our use for all these generations, and that we all count on God's mercy. And maybe that's enough to say about Ruffin at this point. And while not one of the signers himself, it's important to remember Duncan Cameron, and Alan did speak a bit about him. And he was amazing. He was a planter, a judge. He chaired the committee to build the present state capitol of North Carolina. And he served multiple terms as a member of the NC House and Senate. He was a University of North Carolina trustee, president of the State Bank of North Carolina, founder of Christ Episcopal Church of Raleigh, and of St. Mary's School for Girls. And he certainly helped financially in the establishment of St. Matthew's, and built Salem Chapel on his Farintosh plantation at the same time, where our first rector would provide monthly services for his enslaved laborers there. And he did that for some 20 years. His mother was also one of our signers. She was 71 years of age in 1824, the oldest one of our signers. The fifth member of the vestry to note is Jonathan Parker Sneed. He sold dry goods like cloth and accessories and leather goods, and later branched out to include confections with his partner, R.L. Cook. And the next slide, we can see some of the goodies that they were able to get here in Hillsborough, including, rum and brandy and gin and nuts and figs and crackers and pickled salmon and all kinds of things. So they really were well supplied here in Hillsborough. Cigars, that's right. Yeah. 5 members of the Latta family signed the certificate of organization. They were the most numerous group of the descendants of the earlier Anglican presence in Orange County. Our parish register of 1824 to 88 includes 30 Lattas in the index. So there were a lot of Lattas. Yes. And Thomas Latta acquired some acreage near the Eno River from William Kane Sr., who oversaw a large plantation called Pleasant Grove. In 1800, Kane Sr. owned nearly 4,500 acres of land, was the largest landowner in Orange County at that time. And by 1830, he was keeping about 95 enslaved laborers. The estate later passed to one of our signers, William Kane Jr., also known as William Kane II. He married the sister of Thomas Ruffin, built a home in Hillsborough, and was the postmaster. But they also continued to live at Pleasant Grove until his death. Kane II partnered with his nephew, Stephen Moore, another one of our signers, in operating a general merchandise store across the street from the old courthouse. It was called Kane and Moore, and then then Stephen Moore and Company, and later S&W Moore, as his brother joined him in that enterprise. And you'll see here they had imports from British, French, German, India, and domestic dry goods, hats and bonnets and saddle stuff and bridles and harnesses and all of that sort of thing. So, and even some quantity of bacon, maybe they were still getting it. Yeah. The last signer we know a bit about is Dr. Thomas Jefferson Faddis. He was the son of John Faddis, who took over the ownership of the tavern across from the old courthouse and ran that for almost 30 years. It was a community gathering place known for having sumptuous dinners on special occasions. And after his father's death, Thomas Faddis, our signer, and his son continued to operate the tavern for a few years, but he was already in partnership with Dr. James S. Strudwick, who joined the vestry in 1826. And Strudwick and Faddis started a general store in Hillsborough in 1819, but by 1824, they had shifted to focus on medical services and drugs. And that was the origin of James Pharmacy. That we
Oh, wow.
out there on the street. But what emerged from me in considering the busy lives of many of the signers of St. Matthew's organizing document was the kind of dissonance between their very admirable in-town personalities, their civic engagement, their admirable professional achievements and successful business enterprises. And those lives were kind of lived in parallel with this out-of-town lives that involved land holdings that brought them, many of them, great personal wealth through the labor of their enslaved workers. It almost seemed like a retirement investment plan or something with great return on this investment of the land that they had at the cost of the human labor of the enslaved workers. I'll close with this note from our second rector, the Reverend Henry H. Prout, whose good service indicated the first parish register in 1824 to 1881, and copying the entries from our first, the personal register of our first rector, William Mercer Green. And he provided us with this history, and we're just so pleased to have that first register. Also, a recent website from the Orange County Historical Museum on the history of Churton Street was a big help in finding some of these details. I want you to know that next week at our bicentennial celebration, we will have a special visitor providing a living link with this past. The Reverend Deb Angel from Golden, Colorado is coming, whose grandfather's grandfather was the good Reverend Henry H. Prout. And she is very interested in joining us for our celebration and will be coming, and I hope you'll make her feel welcome. And now Robert has some concluding remarks.
Some concluding remarks, as it were. Next week is the 22nd, on Sunday. It's our bicentennial celebration with a lot going on, as you know, in the church, and with the picnic following and the bishop being here and confirmations and all kinds of things. But one of the things we're doing, a key thing we're doing that day, is we're moving in imitation of this first signing of the lay organization of St. Matthew's, with having all the lay people sign a new document organizing St. Matthew's for, next 200 years, right? And so what will happen in the service is the present vestry members will go forward and sign it during the service, and then there'll be pages for you all to sign it later on. And the clergy aren't allowed to sign this. This is a lay document, right? Saying this is your church and you are organizing it for another 200 years. But we will sign pieces of paper saying we saw this happen. We'll be witnesses to this event, as will the children. And for those of you online, or those of you worried about not being here next Sunday, we'll have these pages available for some weeks, so that as many members of the parish as possible can have their names on this historical document, which we're preserving with all kinds of special paper and ink and bindings, and so forth. So I hope you'll be here next Sunday. I hope you have a chance to sign this document. And in the last few minutes of this presentation, I just want to go back to the theme of Alan and Elaine's remarks, which has been how central the laity, the lay, the non-ordained, have been in the formation, the running, the management, the financing, the equipping of St. Matthew's from the very, very, very beginning. And there's something there around the centrality of lay people in the parish, which I think needs to be recalled. If you have a very small parish, or if you have a rector who stays for a very long time, you can begin to think that, oh, the parish is really about that person, about that personality, about their leadership, and so on. But generally, in almost all cases, it's the laity who survive longer than the clergy do. That you are the bedrock of continuity in the parish, and as the parish gets bigger, like St. Matthew's, we are more and more requiring your ministries to one another in the parish. So the parish ceases to be centered around a pastor and becomes more about the laity engaged in their ministry, ministering to each other with the clergy and supported in their leadership. And that is why I had you write down on the little green card at the very start of the presentation what you care most about here at St. Matthew's and what you have to offer. That was a question about where is your heart in this parish and where might be your ministry in this parish. And it might be interesting to look at that card and to wonder, oh, I really have this care and I have these gifts, but I'm doing this other thing at the parish. Maybe my ministry in the parish should be more aligned with this basic concern and these basic gifts that I have. And by the way, these gifts go all the way through life, from the children writing cards to people in the parish and just by running around spreading joy and God's presence, all the way into hospice, where you can be praying for the parish and offering up to the parish and God your life and your love for the people here. It's not like just being the stereotypical active 45-year-old is the peak of it all. Ideally, the lay ministry goes all the way through to that final letting go. So when you come to sign that document, I want you to remember what you wrote down on the little green card and to think like, I pledge myself to St. Matthew's, and this is what I care about, and this is what I have to offer. So that was a little exercise for you to kind of prepare yourself for next week. Yes, Sharon.
So on one of Alan's early slides, there was old life under new forms. And I think going forward, I like new life under old forms.
New life. So there's something about the tradition, but within that, there's a sprouting of new life. Thank you. We will go to questions in a moment and comments. Thank you. I do want to say that all this information, the recording of this forum, the papers, the slides will be available on the new bicentennial landing page on the website, where we'll be keeping the record of all the things we do this year. You can also find out more about all that we've said by purchasing the bicentennial book. This has all been one long commercial for the bicentennial book, which is available again for pre-order, $10.50 on the webpage. It's a beautiful 157-page volume. And I feel like we've also, I feel like I must honor Alan and Elaine, because here they are living examples of superb lay ministry in this parish. Nowhere else do we find an archives committee who can do this kind of amazing work. Not only the book, but for all that you've done in recording and sharing and cultivating the history at St. Matthew's, which has been just once again evident this morning. So I want to thank you. And with that, a question.
Well, it occurred to me in looking at that document that there was a reporter who, because the handwriting's all the same, that the individual didn't actually sign that. And that got me thinking about, is there a way we can, if you don't get to sign a document, is there a way we can attach a list or something of all the members of the church?
So the question is about looking at this document. That's the same handwriting, and I'm going to pass it to Elaine to explain that.
Right. Well, this is where Henry Prout comes in, because it was William Mercer Green had his personal register of the things that he did in his ministry. He went off then to teach at UNC, and Henry Prout comes in. Henry Prout, we understand, the family pronounces the name. He comes in and he visits or works with William Mercer Green and copies all of the names and the baptisms and everything else that were in the personal register of William Mercer Green. And good thing, because William Mercer Green later went off and his library was burned in a house fire. But anyway, it's Henry Prout who has copied that material.
What was this, the script style?
Oh, this is with Spencerian,
Spencerian.
kind of a Spencerian hand at the time. Yeah, and he didn't get everything quite right because he didn't know any of these people, and he was looking at their signatures. And as you can imagine, trying to transcribe everyone's signatures would be a trick. So there are a few discrepancies there, but I think we have been pretty much able to determine who is who. We hope so.
And speaking of Spencerian, the Bicentennial Committee has arranged the document that will be signed is hand calligraphied in Spencerian script.
We understand.
And we understand it. It shall appear this week, God willing. And that will be what the vestry people sign. And then behind that, everybody in the parish. And I think you're right, Cindy. There'll be people who sign on the day. There'll be people who sign weeks following. But we could also put in there a list of all the current members of the parish at this time.
I think if people have been with the church for a long time, who would be in nursing homes. or-
Unable to sign.
Yeah.
We will make a point of that.
Right. And we want to thank Edward Wright, who has taken this image and has done a lovely framing job of it, and we'll have that framed as well as this new document that we'll be signing. And it'll be a really nice memento.
A
of this.
beautiful the original document, and then our document side by side, I believe, in the parish
Right.
house.
It'll be very nice.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Comments? Are you all ready for the 22nd? Yes? Jane?
Mentioned St. Mary's Chapel as existing before this parish did. Were a lot of these families going to St. Mary's Chapel? What role does St. Mary's Chapel play in relationship?
So for the people on Zoom, in case you couldn't hear that, the question is about were the people who founded St. Matthew's also involved at St. Mary's Chapel?
Well, certainly the whole Latta clan was in that area. And the Canes, that's the area around Trayburn and Hardscrabble, if you're familiar with that area. But when St. Matthew's Anglican Church fell to ruin, it was only St. Mary's that was retaining that Anglican presence in this part of Orange County. So it really kind of that was that real living remnant. And then when St. Matthew's was reestablished, and much of the activity was on Hillsborough and not so much out in the plantation areas, St. Mary's Chapel's population tended to dwindle over the years.
And St. Jude's.
And St. Jude's was another another
Yeah,
one
St.
in
Jude's
Stony
was-
Creek area.
yeah.
If there's, where was St. Jude's is the question.
Yeah, well,
Ellen-
Alan Wigg has written a long paper about this, and if you're interested, I'll let you know. But it's she and Lynn Hoke, the diocesan archivist, think that they have found a spot at the crossroads of two old roads that have also some old grave markers, and they think they have found the spot. It's some
It's
miles.
It's in the western part of the county,
uh,
near Alamance, near the orange Alamance line. But the exact location, like
Yeah,
Elaine says.
they think they know, but
Ellen thinks they know where it is, but.
And then a question from Jay.
I wonder if there's a group who are thinking about the future, maybe the next 200 years
Uh-huh.
here at St. Matthew's. It's not too inconceivable, but sort of long-range plan.
What would it be like in 200 years? 10. Jim,
It's interesting because I'm thinking about all these people. I mean, I've never known what Ladder Road was in Durham. I live in Durham.
uh-huh.
And to see that name, I think, oh my God, it's a big road. It's a street in Durham, Ladder Road. But it made me think about these people. What kind of people were these people?
Yeah.
And I was thinking about, well, they're lawyers, they're politicians, there are ministers, priests, all this stuff. There are very few that I know that are, shall I say, entertainers. Like athletes. We have athletes today that are extremely talented in that time. And so just the type of society that put together these lists of these people would compare to our, like, there's not a LeBron James on this. Everybody knows who LeBron James is. And all these influencers on the web that are very prominent. None of that existed then. So that in itself is interesting. These people are merchants, farmers, educators. I've noticed there are very few physicians. Medicine was not worth very much in those days. I mean, you boiled a pot of water and covered the patient with it. That was it. So it's interesting what made people important or prominent or organizers at that time. It's a totally different group.
it's like what makes people important in our time and in their time, and how different that is now is what you're trying to underline. I need to end the Zoom session and move on to planning for the 10:30 service. I think if Elaine and Alan would be willing to have conversation for a little
Sure,
bit.
if anyone else has a question.
So approach them privately if you'd like, but thank you for joining us online. And thank you, Elaine and Alan.